welcome to Cartoonist by Night. I am Anthony Laatsch. I am joined here with D. Brad Gibson, Matt Hansel, Troy Dongarra, and our very special guest, an artist of stuff, Mark Stegbauer. How's it going, Mark?
Good. How you guys doing?
Awesome.
Great.
Keeping warm. Keeping warm.
Trying.
No, not at all.
I've acclimated myself. I was like, the last couple of days it's been in the single digits here in the great north, the great north Wisconsin here. Well, I shouldn't say north. I'm south central, but still, it's
I
it's
got this thing
now.
like 3 feet from me.
I can go outside now with like this hoodie that I'm wearing and be like, okay, this isn't too bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not so many layers now as we get into the heat wave in Wisconsin. So
of 25. Ooh.
Yes.
Right.
So welcome to the show, everybody. What we're going to do here is we're going to learn a lot about Mark. We are going to discuss his topic of choice, which is
art and drawing tools.
There we go. Art and drawing tools. We're going to learn all about that, discuss all of the tools of the trade, if you will. D. Brad came very prepared from his for repairs, rather. And there we go. He's got his tool belt out. And so what we're going to do is before we jump into it, we're going to figure out what we plan to work on. D. Brad, do you have any idea what you're drawing tonight?
Yeah, I'm drawing a student of mine kind of helped me with a character that he wants me to teach him how to draw. And so we did kind of like a police sketch where I drew the shapes and then he described it. No, it's a little more like this, a little more like that. So we finally got his structure anyway. So I'm gonna do that one for him. So I've got it lightly structured out. So I'll clean it up with my favorite drawing tools. And then also the Queen of Canada, Catherine O'Hara, passed away today. So I'm gonna draw a picture of her.
Aw.
Lovely. Yeah, the day of this recording, I lost Catherine, but can't wait to see how that turns out there. We are going to jump over to Matt Hansel. Any idea what you're working on tonight?
I am. I'm going to work with a variety of my favorite drawing tools, so I'll have different drawings that I'm working on. So first up, I'm going to do some brush pens, and we're going to ink this Simon Bar Sinister drawing, Underdog's #1 nemesis. And then I love to use the Gillette 270 dip pen, and for that, we're going to ink some Miss Buxley's from Beetle Bailey.
Very nice.
Hansel of Buxley's.
Hansel of Buxley's, right. And then if there's still time, I'll whip out my fountain pens and I'll work on this Smarty and Spud page that I've been working on.
Lovely.
Nice. Is that in blue pencil?
Yes. And that's one of my favorite drawing tools is a blue pencil.
Jumping over to my drawing board, one thing I was excited to set up where we're talking about drawing tools and what we were going to draw, I decided to draw a character who is quite a tool in himself, which is Captain Hammer from Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
So I've penciled and inked a Captain Hammer as well as a Dr. Horrible himself.
Oh, that's awesome.
I like them.
And a penny. So I've got a Dr. Horrible's trilogy of sketch cards that I'll be coloring this evening. We are going to jump over to Troy. Any idea what you're working on tonight?
I have a character idea that I'm just going to kind of doodle on. So I have rulers, which I don't often use, straight lines. So I'm going to draw some squares on a piece of paper and see what comes of it.
Can't wait to see that magic happen. And jumping over to our guest, Mark, any idea what you're working on tonight?
Couple of things. I printed off a couple of cool pieces on blue line from some pencils that I found on the wonderful interwebs. There is this very cool blue lined Hulk here that I might practice some inking on. Looks like it is a Ron Friends. Might be Tom Morgan, but I think it's Ron Friends. I have that. I found another very cool Ron Friends, Thor and Silver Surfer kind of recreation of Silver Surfer #4 cover that he did this commission. I might draw something original while I'm at it. And then I might also throw some colors on this piece I inked for fun over a awesome gentleman, Mr. Bowden here, who does a lot of stuff online. I can't remember his first name now; it's totally escaping me. But I've been meaning to color this now for like a couple of weeks now. So we'll see what strikes me here and what I get around to.
Cool. Very cool.
Very cool. So feel free to dive into your drawings if you haven't already. We're going to talk about drawing tools. We're going to learn about Mark on this episode of Cartoonist by Night. I like that before the record, I was just making sure that we had the pronunciation for Stegbauer. And yet in my intro, I couldn't even pronounce artist. So there we go. Didn't want to do a take two, but we went with it anyways. But feel free to dive in if you haven't already. And the way we like to start on this show is kind of learn why our guest picked the topic of choice. So, Mark, what do you want to start talking about when it comes to art and drawing tools?
Well, I tell you, the one thing I always see a lot of times, I mean, for me, I love watching process videos, by other artists and just seeing what tools they use, how they're getting the effects that they're doing. I remember several years back, just on Instagram, I started finding, I can't remember if it was Instagram or Twitter, but I started seeing the work of Gabriel Rodriguez, who was the artist and co-creator of Lock and Key. And all of a sudden he was inking his own pencils for a project. And I was watching him, and he was using these pit pens, these Faber-Castell pit pens,
Okay.
and he was just going along and just doing this whole little bits of lines just here and just, building up his line weights and stuff. And, and I had never really seen anybody use the pen the way he was using it. I'm like, that's really cool.
Oh, nice.
And watching his process stuff was just always so much fun, and he used to post like little snippets and they'd be like, oh, secret project I'm working on. And I started seeing stuff. I'm like, and then he had a little bit bigger and I looked at it and I kind of messaged him like, oh, really love your stuff. This is all, it's really cool and fun what you're doing. And I said, are you doing an adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau? And he's like, and I'm like, okay, you are. And he hadn't, and it wouldn't even have been announced like another 2 months, and that's what he was working on. But it was so
perfect,
so cool to see, to see that he was. But it's always cool just to kind of, I love seeing how people will can take whatever art tool they're doing and do something, new with it. And I always too, I love to draw when I'm at cons. If I'm at cons, I'm always trying to, even if I don't have someone actively commission me, to do something,
yeah,
I'll draw anyway. I was like, I'll just draw something, and it'll add in the portfolio later, or just do something for a warm up, and and kids and people come along and watch me. It's like, oh, what are you drawing with? What do you use? And people ask me, and and a lot of times, you see, especially with younger people who are trying to get into doing comics and stuff, they're always asking, well, what do you use? And it's like, what are you doing? It's like, well, there's no real magic tool. It's whatever you like to use that's going to give you, the effect or the line you want to be making. That's the trick. It's like, it's whatever you want to use.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's some all-encompassing magic tool that's gonna make you draw like Bernie Wrightson or David Finch or Mike Mignola.
Yeah.
It's drawing skills and then kind of finding out, oh, this is what I really like to use.
Totally. Yeah, it's yeah, we'll see that like from some of our friends, like Art Baltazar, he likes having a nice box of Crayola, crayons next to him at the table, and he's working on that. And some people work on the simplest with number 2 pencils and stuff, but it's all about how you use it. So
yeah, I mean, like right now, I mean, for when I first started out and doing, when I wanted to breaking the comics, I broke in as an inker. And for me, it was all, I was using mostly like tech pens and didn't really understand about, line weights and things like that. And it wasn't until I met John Nyberg, and I had moved here to Madison, Wisconsin in 1987, and the comic store I found and started going to, Capital City Comics, the owner, Bruce Ayers, was friends with Mike Barron and Steve Rude because they were living in Madison. They were, of course, working on Nexus, and John lived there too, and he was inking Nexus, and he was like, "Well, you should, meet John Nyberg," and he gave me John's number, and I called him up, and I said, "Hey, you know, I would like to learn about comics and stuff," and so he um, had give me a number. I called John. I met him down at his studio, and I brought like some artwork that I had done, and he took the pencil piece that I had drawn. He put some vellum over it and started inking over it, and was really kind of showing me about line weights and how things overlap and things like that, and it just really opened up my eyes a ton. And he was like doing this all like with a brush, so I kind of saw what brushes he was using, and I knew a little bit about using like dip pens and stuff like that. And so it was like, oh, okay. So it really started learning about the different tools and practicing, and I would go and get like sheets of just like paper pads, like legal pads, and I would get like cheap like brush pens, like Tombow brush pens from the art store, and I would just do like pages and pages of just like line strokes back and forth, and just fill them to get that, you know, that control, and that started doing that inking muscle memory, as it were, you know. And then eventually I started doing more with like number two Winsor Newton brushes, or, crow quill, like 102 crow quills, and then, learning about what other tools guys were using. Like, oh, hey, Jerry Ordway uses a Gillette 659. I started playing around with some of those, and had 107s and all sorts of different stuff, just playing around with what I liked,
Yeah.
and, and then when I broke in, um, inking, I broke in with some of the black and white indie books in the late 80s. I was working with, I did my first job was Lensman War of the Galaxies, an adaptation of the Lensman anime and manga that Tim Eldred was penciling and writing. And the paper he used was a little slicker, so I was using almost all brush on that, like a number two Winsor Newton on that whole thing, with the exception of, using like Kohinoor rapidographs for, straight line stuff, because that's what you used back in the day. You used the Kohinoor rapidographs, and God, I ruined so many of those just by letting them get clogged, and you know, just too many.
Those are worth money nowadays.
Oh, I know. Oh well, I mean, it's funny because Sandra Hope, who's an anchor, did a lot of stuff at Wildstorm, and
Yeah.
as we know, but she will post videos every now and then of her inking. She did a whole bunch last year where she had found her old Kohinoors and cleaned them up, and she was actually doing inking on some stuff with the Kohinoors, because she was like going through and doing like some brick rubble with them. And it was like,
cool.
and it's like, I have some of those somewhere, and I found mine, soon after that, and I'm like, oh wow, I should try and clean these up if I can. But yeah, so I was doing a lot more brushwork in those days. And then, like everybody else, when, Scott Williams kind of hit the scene, I was doing a lot more stuff with a 102, because just the paper quality was better when I started working at Marvel and DC, so I would do like a mix of a lot of pen, a lot of brushwork on like hair and things like that. And then when the market collapsed and I was doing more odd jobs, not through like Marvel and DC, but a little indie work here and there, I never knew what kind of paper I was going to get, on the pencils. So it's like, okay, this person's doing all plate finish. Okay, I'll use a pen on this. Okay, there's no way I'm going to be using a pen on this. It's going to be all brush for this one, So the tools really changed up, depending on what I was working on. And
Well, And the quality of some of the tools has gone down over the years too.
Yeah.
Winsor & Newton brushes just aren't the same as they used to be.
Yeah, I learned about the um, Raphael Kalinsky
Yes,
series.
which now they don't make them anymore.
I've managed to find a couple here and there. I managed to get some before they got it so you couldn't get them out of Russia anymore.
Yeah.
But I learned about the Kalinsky brushes through Gary Martin's Art of Inking book,
Ah.
because guys like Mark Farmer and Carl Story and other guys that's what they were using. And I'm like, oh, hey, I should try these out. And I remember the first time I got them, um, my dad and I went down we decided to go and take a day, and he and I go and hang out. He and I hardly ever did that, when I was older, especially after when the market had collapsed in the mid 90s, and it was harder for me to find, work as an inker. Um, but we decided to go down. Hey, let's go down to Chicago, and that's where he grew up, and it was kind of nice. He wanted to kind of go and see his old neighborhood on a whim. So we went down to Chicago, and I heard about a store called Pearl Pate. And I'm like, oh, this is supposedly like a really humongous art store. And it was. And went there, and they had the Kolinsky brushes, and they were like half the cost of a Winsor Newton. And I'm like, oh, I'm stocking up. I bought like 10, but I bought like 10 brushes, you know. And I got, because I always used to like use like a number 3 Winsor Newton, and then I kind of went down to like a number 2. And so I was getting like a couple of each of those, and it was just like, oh, these were great. The points were fantastic on them. They still had a good, snap to them. So I was like, going, okay, this is the brush for me now. And I never went back, to the Winsor Newtons, you know. And it was soon after that also I started kind of, you know, doing, more work. I mean, depending on kind of what I was doing, I would really switch up my tools a lot. I did a book. I was the illustrator on a book that some friends of mine had wrote, and it was the Do-It-Yourself Guide to Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse.
Mhm.
And so I did all the illustrations in it, and almost all of that I inked with the Faber-Castell Pitt pens and Pigma Microns.
Oh wow.
And then some other like some like brushwork here and there, on some bigger stuff. But just because a lot of it was just smaller spot illustrations, So that's a lot of what I did. And it was soon after that I kind of got back and, seeing a lot of artists online, and kind of really wanting to kind of get back into, you know, drawing and penciling my own stuff again. And that's why I met guys like Mitch Gerrits, who's been doing, like who did Mr. Miracle. And
But yeah,
so it was, back in the day, he used to do all of his stuff traditionally, but he was all about the zebra pens.
Ah.
And he got me into these things, and I'm like, ooh, I should try these out. And I found them, and they're just, I mean, I love them. They're a great, awesome brush pen, you know? And that's what I'm doing all of this Hulk stuff with right now, for the most part, is with one of these. I mean, because I love them because they've got a really nice tip to them. They got this one. We've got the um like the fine, and then they've got like a one that's a little bit fatter, which is nice. And they're like $2.50. I think they're 2.50 now, but I used to get them for 2. When I first started getting these, I'd get them 10 at a time. And they're great. I mean, they travel great. I'd use them at shows all the time. Um, but they were really nice to use, and people were like, absolutely, were like, "What do you mean that was all brush pen?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just used this for this whole project. I inked an entire like graphic novel with this size zebra pen and this one, and then a little brushwork here and there." You know, and people were like, "Wow, that's some great brushwork." It's like, that's all this, man. That's all of this was, and they're like, "Holy crap," because that's how good of, how good I could make it work, you know. And I know, and I've been finding a couple other little brush pens. I like these ones are really nice too. These um, they're Tombow makes them, but they're Fudenasuke, and these are really nice. And these two, I saw a YouTube video by Walden Wong, who's another inker, and he takes these and he can refill them because he can pop the end off, and he puts his own ink in them and refills them.
Ah,
You know, and the tips seem to work. I like these Tombow ones. The tips seem to last a little bit longer than the zebra pens do. Um, and these you can get a 2-pack of at Michael's, where it's like um, this one is like the little bit wider tip on it, and then they have a finer tip, and you can usually get them in a 2-pack for I think like $10 at Michael's. So these are really nice, but yeah, but they're the quality of these types of disposable brush pens has really, gone up over the years, and
they just. I was just going to say they just quit making my favorite brush pen, which is this the darker blue Kurtaki disposable one. Apparently, they don't make them anymore.
Yeah, and that's the one thing, and that was the one thing too that like with the Kalinskis, it's finding a tool that you really like using, and all of a sudden, oh, you can't get it anymore.
Can't get it anymore.
Yeah, I know that's what it was too for a while with the like the Gillette 659s. I remember for a while because those became really hard to find, and I had a whole ton. And I remember like seeing Jerry Ordway at a show, and we were just talking about something, and he was like, "God, I can't find these at all." And I'm like, "Dude, I got a whole bunch with me that I just brought in my pen case and I ended up like selling him like 30 nibs, while I was at the show. I'm like, dude, just give me $20, you're good. Here you go. You know.
Yeah, I've had a similar thing recently too, of like finding something, then realizing that that you can't find them anywhere, and that is the ultimate cheddar Doritos. I don't know if anyone's had those. Like it said limited time only, but it's one of those that like you just don't see them anymore. So I'm hoping they bring them back. So I very much relate to your story right now.
Yeah. So it's like, I mean, I have been kind of getting back into using, a nib here and there, mostly for like little fine art things I do, and just playing around with stuff, just because I don't really do a whole lot of just, inking over other people much anymore. And and anytime I do like my own stuff, I'm more about like having the convenience of being able to not have to, have an ink bottle out and, and just being able to ink on the fly. Like I'm going to go sit up on the couch and, you know, watch Stranger Things and, ink sketch cards with these, or just kind of, play around and do some fun thing to ink for fun like this, and not have to lug, all the tools around.
Yeah.
So it's still fun to play around with, with the classic tools like brushes and steel nib pens and things like that. But it's all about, for me, is like, what am I trying to get out of this drawing? What effect do I want to do? And if I can do it with this, hey, let's do it with this. I don't have to keep it so rigid, and say, no, this is the only way this is going to do it. I've never really been like that. And that's what, one thing that when I remember working doing some stuff at DC, I was doing a project for Frank Pittarisi, and I remember him saying that was really nice pen work. That was some great pen work on that on these pages here. And I'm like, no, that's brush. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's all brush, dude. And then stuff, he goes, oh, I really like that brush work. It's like, no, that's all pen. And he's like, it's like, dude, you're like a chameleon. I'm like, well, it's just finding what works and what you want to get out of the line, and I think a lot of that really also came from a couple of years I worked as an assistant because I did a lot of I eventually became John Nyberg's assistant on a lot of books he was doing, and also that led me to meeting a lot of other guys he knew out of Chicago and the Midwest, guys like Mark Nelson and Hillary Barta and Bill Reinhold and and then Mike Macklin in Milwaukee, and I did a lot of assistant work for a lot of those guys. I mean, I remember probably I think it had to have been probably the second year I was in college. Yeah, right after that, I think, or right around that time. That summer, I ended up doing some work for Bill Reinhold, um, just helping him just fill in like little areas of black on some stuff. But I had earlier that year, I had started doing some stuff. Um, my first actual assistant work was with Hillary Barta and not with John Nyberg, even though John taught me most of what I know now. Um, I ended up helping out on an issue of the New Mutants over Rob Liefeld for with Hillary Barta, and Hillary was getting had pages were kind of coming in a little bit late, and I had gone to a show in Chicago that was going on, probably had to be like late winter, early spring, and and was there, and it was kind of cool because I had met Tony Daniel probably the year before. It was both he and I were both like trying to break in, and we had gone to Chicago, and when it was still Chicago Comic Con, and when they did portfolio reviews and all that, and they would have like editors from Marvel and DC would have certain times, and you could go, and back in the days when the editors would be you know want to look at your stuff, and then would be like, okay, here, work on this and work on this, and you know and I met Hillary, and I told, oh yeah, I'm John Nyberg is teaching about teaching me inking and a bunch of other stuff, and he ended up was like going, would you want to help me out by doing like some backgrounds? And I'm like, okay, you know. He said, well, if you're if John's teaching your stuff, teaching you, obviously you must probably know what you're doing. I'm like, well, okay, sure, why not? And so yeah, so I ended up like hanging out at Hillary's. A buddy of mine had come down, and I'm there calling my parents. I'm like, well, I'm not coming home tonight because I'm gonna be here in Chicago and doing comics. And they were like, okay. It's like, so it was so there I am at like Hillary Barta's place, and at that time he was roommates with Barry Crane, another Chicago artist, and so I'm there. Barry's drawing this because Barry was out, and I'm there, inking backgrounds and filling in blacks and doing all sorts of stuff, and so it was, learning that from, you know, all these guys. So eventually it's like I then started doing stuff for John, and then Mark Nelson would teach me stuff. And then I ended up doing backgrounds for Mike Macklin when he was inking Eric Larson on Amazing Spider-Man. So I mean, in one course of summer I'm like helping John do stuff. I'm driving down to Milwaukee, I'm picking up Spider-Man pages from Mike to work on. I'm popping over to Chicago to maybe help out like Bill Reinhold on something or somebody else, and and doing and cranking out backgrounds, and the next day taking another batch to somebody else, and you know driving 3 hours all over the freaking Midwest to do this stuff, and and learning from all these guys different ways to do stuff. And in the course of doing that, and being an assistant to a bunch of guys, you learn how to adapt your style to what they were doing so that it didn't look different, so it looked seamless. So that makes really taught me how to adapt to the pencils I was working on. And then when I broke in, I could work on a bunch of different styles. I could go and ink, in a very Scott Williamsy type of style, but then go in and ink, in a like, a style of like, say, Carl Kiesel, or maybe kind of do something a little different, so it looked more kind of like Al Williamson, or, what have you. An editor could call me up and say, "Hey, I've got this guy. I'd like you want to ink this," and they could kind of get, you know, they could see that I'd be able to, adapt to the styles, and then kind of, after the market collapsed, and I was kind of lucky enough that a lot of other artists who were still working, you know, would need help, with the occasional things. And I remember helping Terry Beatty out, and I inked the world's finest adaptation for the Batman and Superman animated series that they did, that Joe Staton had penciled. And I was helping Terry Beatty out, doing a lot of backgrounds and secondary figures. And I sent him the pages back, and he goes, "Oh wow, these are really nice." It's like, "Are you gunning for my job?" I said, "Well, it's like, I just tried to do my best Bruce Timm, on these." And he goes, "Bruce Timm would look at these and probably be jealous as hell too." And I was like, "Okay, I will take them as a compliment."
That's a good compliment to get.
Well, I can confidently say that out of all of our guests here on Cartoonist by Night, that you are very great at answering one question, and I thank you for all the extra details there. So it makes my job easier, where I just get to listen to all these great stories. So excellent. We are going to jump over to Matt Hansel. If you kind of want to talk about your experience with drawing tools, and almost kind of what Mark gave us there. If you have anything you want to say about that.
Sure. I started off learning how to do all the traditional tools, kind of like Mark, brushes and pro quill nibs and things like that. But I too like to watch process videos and things like that, and learn about other tools and how people use them and how they get the texture effects that they're using, or whatever. And so, and also in studying other artists' styles, you figure out what tools they're using to try to get the same effects that they're working on as well. I go back and forth. I really like using brush pens for the reason Mark said. They're convenient. They're way cheaper than most other art supplies, especially brushes these days. And the quality has increased so much since the 90s, when a lot of that stuff first came out, that they're well worth the usage. But I found myself the last couple of years going back to using dip pens and fountain pens. A lot of stuff, like when I work on Marty and Spud, I use Pelican fountain pens, which aren't the cheapest in the world, but if you take care of them, they'll last forever. And so I've been using those to ink Marty and Spud. But when I work on the comic strip stuff like Hagar or Beetle Bailey or whatever I'm doing, I use the Gillette 290, which is what a lot of cartoonists used back in the 50s and 60s. And I love the effect. You can get a really thick and thin line. You can get real thin lines. You can get a really thick line if you bear down on it a little bit. It's a really
You're a Renaissance man.
Yeah, it's a really versatile. It's a really versatile tool. The only thing that you have to watch with nowadays is that the inks, like Higgins ink, is just not black anymore. It's almost
That's the problem I find too, is that, so I mean I've got a couple of different inks that I've picked up just based on recommendations from people, because stuff like Higgins Black Magic, that is like,
it's like
I remember when
now.
that used to be, I remember when that would be just like that would be the stuff, because it's like, oh, you can't use that, you can't use a dip pen for that stuff, it'll just be too thick and clog it up. And that was true. And if you were like using it in a brush, it's like, oh man, make sure you really wash it out, or that brush will be like toast. And now it's like,
Yeah, it's like water almost now. I've been using carbon platinum or platinum carbon ink, which is what a lot of manga artists use, and it's really
Yeah,
black.
yeah, I've got
It
some of that I want to try out, but yeah, that's ace of spades, man. That's
that's it's the blackest I've been able to find that I can, and I can use it in my fountain pens too, which is nice. Uh, it's a versatile enough ink that you can use it in fountain pens, dip pens, brushes. You can use it in just about everything. Um, for penciling, I like to do my layouts with a blue Pilot Cowl .7. I usually do that for my roughs, and then I tighten them up with a Pentel Twist Erase .9, which is a pretty thick uh, uh, lead, but I find it keeps me from getting too precious with everything, and letting me do a lot of the detail stuff in the inks, which is what I like to do, especially if I'm inking myself. You can get away with not having to pencil every single line, and so that's what I use for penciling.
yeah. I
Um,
used to be a big fan of the blue pencil back in the day when I was first kind of getting in because I saw a lot of guys were doing it because it's like, well, if you put it down, it's really great for structure
yep.
and everything. But then I kind of was falling into the trap of it getting like I'd put too much down, it would get too waxy.
Yes, yeah. I have that same problem. I got to watch how much I actually put down on the paper.
Yeah, I know a bunch of people like the color race ones too.
Yes,
The
those are
blue.
pretty good. Yep, and they quit making those too.
So
I
this is a Zebra Sensations, and it's got the blue lead, and you can actually, if you can find them. Oh, this one's almost out, but if you can find them, it's like refillable, like a mechanical blue lead pencil.
I think I've seen those.
Yeah, I got this one from like a Dollar General store.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
but I've also seen them at Michael's for significantly more.
Well, I was gonna jump over to Troy anyway. So Troy, if you want to kind of take the take the wheel here and kind of talk about your experience with drawing tools and how you've developed and stuff like that.
Well, if a little while ago I went black for a period of time because I had two pens that I wanted to use and I couldn't get either one of them to get flow.
Hmm.
And Matt mentioned, if you treat your pens well, they'll last forever. Likewise, if you ignore them, uh, they they won't flow for you. So um, I just kind of set them upside down and still not flowing. And both of them have a brand new ink cartridge in them.
Uh-oh.
So I will not be using my fountain pens tonight. Just gonna do the Zebra. I think it's a Zebra brush pen. Same thing I normally use. The Tombow brush pen.
Yep, those are the ones I use. Those are really nice.
Yeah, I like them. And they're cheap, like you had mentioned before. And I forgot to turn the camera back on. I was here listening to you for quite a while before I realized that the camera was still off. So
Whoops.
And Troy, if there's anything else too, like with things that you started with, or maybe artists that you admired and wanted to, experiment with, do you have any history with that you want to talk about?
well, I've always loved the way brushwork looks. Um, Hansel and I have talked in depth about Aragones with his fountain pens and how we both enjoy the way that looks. Uh, I like so many different things that there's not really like one particular that stands out. But I will say that brushes and brush pens, I bet I filled I filled pages with strokes, just general strokes with the pen for many years before I got comfortable doing using them for a drawing. And then once I got comfortable, it just was like I felt very comfortable. But yeah, I don't know why it took me so long to figure it out, but
Yeah.
I like it.
Cool, cool. And we are focused on you, Troy. Can you talk about what we're looking at?
It's a dude sleeping, and that's a bird. Bird is waking him up.
Oh,
Nice.
for a comic you're doing there? Or
Just a
just practice
kind of an
pages?
idea,
Okay.
Okay,
sort of an
okay.
idea.
Cool, cool. Uh, Jumping over to D Brad, if you want to, same thing I said to all the other guys here. If you want to take the wheel on talking about your experience with drawing tools and testing them out and finding what works for you.
Well, I always I, I like the color race, and they say they don't make me, and so that's why I kind of have to go to teacher stores and get like the red pencils here because I like the feel of these. So I've had them in red or blue or purple. And then there was like a lighter blue, but I did not like that one. That one was really waxy. I didn't like it. But yeah, I like to draw the structure and stuff, and so I can it's like the feel of that pencil, and then for I'm just kind of new with whenever I had to do cleanup stuff, I'd always do it in pencil for storyboards, and then they would just photocopy them and stuff to darken them. And it was always rough work too. And so cleaning up with ink is just kind of something new I've been doing. And I haven't found the perfect one yet, but I've been experimenting. And then these ones I like. I've asked, I found out what Paco Rodriguez used for his Donald Duck stuff,
Ooh.
and this Tom, he said Tombow. I don't know how to pronounce it. Fu
Fendusunoke.
Go.
Suki. Yep.
Suki. Yeah, yeah. That's what I got. A couple of different ones of that, and I really like them.
That's what I'm making with right now. I've been
Yeah,
flipping back and forth because it's like, all
me
right, how
too.
close is this one to dying? Okay, this one's dead now. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a few of them here. I bought a bunch. Yeah, one of them's kind of drying up. Yeah, awesome.
D Brad, you said when you were doing animation and cleanup and stuff, they would just Xerox they didn't ink
Oh,
the
oh, I did it for storyboard. I'm talking about
oh
storyboard.
for storyboards.
Yeah,
Okay.
Very nice.
not, not for the cells. Or yeah, the show I worked Ed and Eddie was the last show to have cells for animation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
Um,
then I think it's final season. It moved to digital inking.
Uh,
Cool, cool. I've mentioned on the show before too, with being the least experienced artist on the show. It's always great listening to you guys and watching the magic happen. And so I mostly just use these Avengers pencils from the 2012 movie. Uh, so I use those to start on my sketch cards. I use the Sharpay brand here for a lot of my coloring for my blacks. I have colored pencils, and that's just my way of saying that I really don't know much about anything when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it's always fun to see and hear these stories and learn about all these tools and see how all of you guys are.
And what markers do you use for the coloring?
Let's see here. I have 3 sets next to me that I kind of dabble in and out of. Of course, I grabbed the one that doesn't have an actual brand name on it. Let me try to grab this other one. Ogili.
Oh, Geely.
Yeah, something that I just kind of played around with, and obviously just looking for whatever cheap ones are out there. And since I only use the small sketch cards and stuff like that, I can get a lot of mileage on this kind of stuff. But other than that, I do have some inking pens that I did try to experiment with, which I have right here. And once again, I don't know the names of any of this stuff here, but basically just whatever was cheap and allowing different things. I've never experimented with.
Yeah, those are the Sakura Micron like
Uh,
knockoff ones. A lot
okay,
of those are yeah. There's a lot of people who are making those now, and they can be your mileage may vary on them. They're especially if you're like hey, this gives me the effect I want to get. Go
yeah.
for it. You don't have to drop a whole ton of money.
Oh yeah.
On tools
Right,
if
it's not designer tools, right?
yeah.
Yeah, they're like I said, just looking for like whatever's cheaper and going beyond the Sharpie brand. And since I don't draw anything bigger than sketch cards like this, I feel that if I was doing sketch covers and stuff like that, that I'd actually need to start learning better tools. Past guest on the show, Justin Castaneda, who does a lot of great work with like whiteout pens and stuff on his cardboard sketches that he calls them.
Oh, yeah.
Uniball Signos. I just used your normal like Bic whiteout pens and stuff like that. But once he was on the show, and I bought a couple sets of these, and I absolutely love the flow on these guys here. So usually like to do that for some fun little touch up effect work and stuff like that. So as far as getting technical, that's as technical as I get.
Well, I tell you, I learned, and the thing is, you never know what you're going to find that people use. You can always think, oh, they must be using this for their tool, and then it's like, wait, they're using this. I remember I was a huge fan of Frank Cho's Liberty Meadows, because of when it was running, on in the
Yeah.
newspaper, and he appeared as a guest at a show I did. I still do up in Minneapolis, the MCBA SpringCon and FallCon shows. And I remember the year he was there, the first year he was there, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And I met him and I watched him, and he was inking with the Pigma microns. And you could, I mean, the effects he was, I was like, when I was looking at the newspaper stuff, I'm like, that's got to be a brush, or that's got to be, a nib pen. Nope, it was just him with a Pigma micron, just doing this beautiful, like fabric folds. And it was like, okay, that's cool. It's like you can do that. And that's when I've started playing around with those, you know, just to
Does he
kind
do
of
it with
see what they do.
does he do it with Bic pens too? Like just regular Bic
Yeah,
pen?
yeah, he'll do something, but yeah, but this was just like he'd just be doing all this beautiful, just line drawings with that, and I'm like, okay, you know, and that's what I think really kind of opened my eyes up more to alternate kind of tools that didn't have to be more of the traditional ones, like your steel nibs and your brushes, and and that's it,
Very cool.
I discovered that Jeff McNelly, before he went digital, the editorial cartoonist and also the cartoonist of Shoe,
you know.
used Pentel pocket brush pens and ballpoint pens to ink before he went digital. And that
Wow.
blew my mind. I'm like, how does he use a ballpoint pen? And then I saw some of his originals, and it just blew my mind. And I that was one of those moments where I thought, you can use anything, literally.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
and I
and
think
it's all about
that's
the effect. Joe Kubert told me one time, use whatever pen you want because it's about the effect. It's the printed page that counts, not how you got there.
yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's when I um when I did the Ironclad graphic novel that my buddy Greg Paulson had penciled. I mean, I other than like the very first two pages I got when I inked a lot more stuff, I was like, going, okay, I'm gonna start doing the paper quality is great. I'm going to do traditional. I'm going to do a lot more brushwork and this and that. And then I just started wanting to do, you know, I would ink pages while I was, sitting on a little portable easel and watching, TV or doing something. So I was like, that's when I really started to, when I started, using the zebra pens to ink those pages. I'm like, okay, I'm really getting these really great effects with just doing this. I'm like, well, I'm just going to continue doing this. And the whole rest of the graphic novel was inked with those brush pens, you know. And Greg was like, "Dude, you inked all of this." When I told him that, he couldn't believe it. He was like, he said, "I thought you were using like nibs and brush." I'm like, "Well, to fill in the black areas, yeah, I used a brush, but everything else was, with the brush pens." And he was just like, he's like, "Dude, that's amazing," you know. I'm just like, well, it just was behaving like a brush for me, and so therefore I could get the effect I wanted.
And that's half the battle, just trying to get the effect.
Hmm.
All
How
right,
about digital? Do you use digital, Mark?
What was that?
Use digital at all?
Um, the only, I mean, I've been wanting to play around with it, but I've gotten to the point where I figure, I'm too old to kind of be doing some of this crazy stuff. I have kind of, I've jumped into the digital where I'm doing digital lettering through Procreate on the um, webcomic I do on my Patreon page, Warp Dragon. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I am 100% traditional, just
Uh,
because I love having the feel of, you know, a pen in my hand and putting something on the paper and feeling that, that resistance on the paper and, having that physical product. My wife would probably, beg to differ with me with all the boxes and boxes and boxes of, you know, artwork of stuff like this, of like these little warm ups or, comic pages and that I did that for projects that never went anywhere, and
yeah.
stuff like that. But I just, I'm too old school, mostly because I really love the medium of putting, pencil and pen to paper.
Right.
what we're going to do here, I have a bunch of images of Mark's artwork that I kind of perused through online, things that kind of caught my attention to show some examples of his work. While I show that slideshow, rather than commenting on what I show, unless there's a story that happens to come with it, we could have you kind of talking about young Mark and kind of when art came into your life and, whether it was an early age, whatever. So if you
Sure.
kind of talk about your art journey while I show the stuff in the background. But
Oh,
again,
sure.
if something pops up on the screen and you really want to say something about it, feel free to chime in. But otherwise, we're just going to listen to
Okay.
you and look at your work. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, for me, drawing, and art was pretty much as soon as I could pick up a pencil, you know, and I think because I mean, my first comic that I can remember um, picking up was wasn't probably I think either it was I think it was either a Justice League that's I think it was Dick Dillon had done the art, but that was the classic Justice League lineup, and they had traveled to Ran, and Adam Strange was in it, and it was like classic old school Justice League,
Right.
and I just remember that comic and just being enthralled with it, and I wrote all over it, of course, and and it wasn't, and actually a few years ago, I found somebody had I was just going through a box. Oh, yeah, that was one of my favorite Magneto pieces.
Oh yeah.
Um, but going through a box of comics at a show, and I found a copy of that comic, and I'm like, well, I gotta save this one. But a lot of I think a lot of my drawing really started when probably right around when I was like 9, 10 year old, and like, well, actually, I should say when I was 7 and Star Wars came out. That
yeah.
really, I think, opened my eyes. I mean, I became like the biggest Star Wars freak in school, and but that really made me want to um, draw. And I mean, and then when Empire Strikes Back came out, I was always drawing like, you know, the Battle of Hoth on pieces of paper, and of course, each time would be like a piece of paper that would be, stretched out like, you know, the horizontal and panoramic, and I'd have like little snow speeders flying, and I'd have those just like the heads and parts of the bodies of the walkers over on the far right, and the snow speeders coming, and each time I drew them the scale was always different, so it might be like this really gigantic head of a you know of a walker, and then a little teeny tiny snow speeder, and now looking back, it's like going, definitely not to scale, it's
Yeah.
but that's what really got me on that artistic drawing path. And then, you know, around that time is when I really started getting into comics, like really, really collecting hardcore, and a lot of that was due, I think, to um, Claremont and Burns X-Men run.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah.
Because my first X-Men comic was number 125, and then 128. I had found it like a 7-Eleven that were not, a couple months apart, and then it's like, who are these characters? What is this? I mean, I had a comic here or there, that I had picked up as a kid or grabbed, at a 7-Eleven before going on like a family road trip. And,
Yeah.
oh, that Swamp Thing was one of my faves to do. That's why I started wanting to get back into doing watercolor again. But that era of comics, just opened my eyes up so much to just, comics and art. And, it was like, oh wow. And then, I started collecting, pretty much X-Men right after Byrne had left, right at like 144 was when I started like collecting every X-Men and going and getting Avengers and tons of other comics and collecting them. They're like, oh, I wanted to read this one, read this one. I mean, I was getting, 82, 83, so much stuff I would get, you know. And I remember when that Frank Miller Wolverine miniseries came out, I was like copying the covers, and tracing stuff, and you know, and and I was just really wanting to draw all the time. And during that time, I was living out in Beaverton, Oregon, right outside of Portland, and I was lucky enough that there was a comic book shop there um, called Pegasus Comics and Games. The owner was Mike Richardson, who started Dark Horse.
Oh,
So that comic store was where I was getting my X-Men and addiction taken care of, and so many other things, and I was drawing and you know blowing my entire allowance on comics all the time. That's pretty much what I was just constantly just getting.
Well, like you say, that was a new golden era, especially at Marvel,
Oh
because you
yeah.
had Simonson on Thor and
Oh
Miller
yeah.
on Daredevil and
Oh yeah. And then you had
Bob
like
Layton on Iron Man and
oh yeah, and you had like Secret Wars coming out, and
Right.
and Alpha Flight, and and all just
oh right, and
so
Byrne
much
on
stuff.
Fantastic Four and right, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember, and we had there was a signing that was happening at Pegasus. They were going to have um, Denny O'Neil, and then it was going to be Luke McDonald and Steve Mitchell, and they're
Oh,
out there doing they were doing a tour for the whole, you know, Rhodey becoming Iron Man,
right, yeah.
you know, and and I knew, and I remember Denny O'Neil's name, and of like, oh hey, yeah, he wrote the Green, no, the Batman, and then also Green Lantern and Green Arrow, and I had some reprints, and I remember, oh, this is really good, and and people were saying, I remember it's like, oh yeah, you should see your work, and tell you and help you and give you some advice maybe. And I thought, okay, cool. And I remember going to the signing and getting there, and Denny O'Neil had to cancel. Something had come up, and he had to cancel. And I was, of course, crushed
Yeah.
because I thought, oh, this is it's like I did, because I had done like these, or I had done like a recreation of um, the third issue from of the Wolverine miniseries, where he's sitting like in the dark there, and and it was like I had drawn it like just by looking at it, and it was like really, really. I mean, even looking back at now, it was like really close to it,
Yeah.
and and I was just like crushed, and but somebody had come in his place, and it was Archie Goodwin.
Oh wow.
And at that time too, when they were there doing this signing, Archie was there talking about Epic
Oh, okay.
Illustrated, you
Oh,
know. But also too, and Mike was like, "Well, you should show Archie stuff." I mean, Archie's a big editor and does all this. I'm like, okay. And Archie looked at my stuff. He goes, "Well, he looked. It's like, did you draw this or trace this?" I said, "No, I drew it." And because it was slightly bigger than the comic, and he goes, and he kind of he went and grabbed like a copy of Mike had handed him a copy of the comic, and he looked at it and he goes, well, he said, all these proportions are really good. And it's like, this is really nice line work here. And, he says, that's sort of like, this is really, really good. It's like, you have a talent. And he said, here's what you should work on. He said, it's great that you're, copying stuff, but also start drawing on your own, see what, how stuff works together, how stuff is structured. It's like, and he worked with me and talked to me for like 20 minutes
Oh wow.
and, and really, really taught me a lot. And that really helped, and I made it a point then to, if I was going to go to that, this is really what I wanted to do, and, and be an illustrator. And, and I made it a point to, like, if I was going to go to shows, that I would talk to the creators and talk to the artists, and, you know, have, learn from them. And that really helped me throughout, like, I think when I was trying to break in, that I really want to learn and show my stuff, when I was trying to get in as an inker, just, and, to see, hey, what am I doing here? What can I do better? And learn how to do a lot of stuff. And I think also too, it helped me become a better illustrator too, you know, and seeing how a lot of people approached inking and drawing. And that's one thing that I have tried to do myself when, when I go to shows and somebody wants, a younger person who wants to get into comics, or even an older person who wants to get into comics and shows me a portfolio, you know, I feel I'm going to pay it forward, because this is what everybody did for me.
Yeah.
And it would be kind of like, you know, I think, for me not to do the same thing would be doing a disservice to the industry, you know, and to the comic community and the craft of doing this, So I've always tried to do this, and it was years later when I was working at Marvel and DC. I was out at the offices in New York. I had stopped out. I was seeing my editor on Nova when I was working on that at the time, and I went into the DC offices, and I picked up some work when I was there, and I'm doing some couple issues of Steel, um, and I popped my head in because I saw Archie Goodwin's office. I just kind of popped my head in, and and I said, "Oh, hi." It's like, "Hi, Archie," and I said, I'm Mark." And he goes, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you." And I said, "I'm doing some work, out of Frank Pederici's office, and I've been, I was doing some work over on, on this stuff here, and but I wanted to come and say hello, because I said, you probably don't remember me, but back, in 1983, 82, through whatever the year was, I'm like, you had come out to, a signing out in Oregon at this store, and you gave me a lot of good advice." And he was like, "Oh my God," it's like, "How are you doing?" And I said, well, pretty good. Just,
You're here.
and yeah, and and I just want, and he and I just, talked for a little bit, and and we had kind of talked. It's like, well, I'm doing, with this Tales of the Dark Knight stuff. It's like there's always a bunch of stuff where we might have to get different art people, teams on there. He said, but give me your information, and definitely I want to try and do something here. And unfortunately, it never happened, and he had passed away. But just being able to learn, from him in just even the small way that I did really, I think made a difference because when you're, being that age is hard enough, when you're, 12, 13 years old, and, you know, everything that goes with that, and wanting to really, know what you want to do with your life, and, you know, be passionate about something, and having, someone who's in the industry that you want to be in encourage you like that when you're that age is a big thing,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's one thing that I've really counted myself to be lucky in this industry, is that I may not know all the the big names. I don't know Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and some all this other, but the people I do know are every bit as good and kind, and I think that is worth every bit as knowing someone who sells 1 million copies of books. You know, I mean, so many of the people I've known in this industry over the years, and are more than just friends and acquaintances of college. They're family. You know, and I mean, God, I've seen you know people get married, and their kids grow up, and their kids grow up and get married, and you know, and it's family. You know, and it's and I think part of the longevity of being in this industry and doing it is my buddy Steve Bryan likes to say I'm too stupid to quit. Yeah. But it's I love going out and doing shows, and seeing the fans, and to me that's awesome. I mean, to this day I still get people at almost every show I go to. Someone brings up a copy of Nova that I did 30 some years ago, you know, and I'm still signing those things, And I remember a few years ago at the Minnesota show, guy came up and he had his son with him, and and he had, it's like, it's like, you don't remember me because the last time you saw me, it's like I was, he was there with like his 6-year-old son, and he came when I did a signing in St. Cloud when Nova came out, and he was a kid, and he was now there with his son,
Oh, wow.
and he had brought another copy that his son had got for his son
Oh,
that I
cool.
had signed, and I'm like, okay, I'm not crying, that's you crying. Someone's cutting onions behind me, but also it's like, okay, I'm old. It's like I'm really old now, you know. But that's the that's a big part of what I love about doing this, is that the people are still, you know, seeing comics as a legitimate art form, and something that they want to, introduce to their kids, and those, and give them the, those stories, and let them see, this amazing, amazing artwork that is, being produced by people with just like, the simplest of tools, but have just like are just they're just making amazing and incredible stories that are still, that are still being read, You know, I mean, if you think about it, then we are now here at what 65, almost 70 years of the Marvel universe now. What 1961 or what that's we're at, right?
Yeah.
61. Yeah. So you figure, you know, and people are still reading Simon and Kirby Fantastic Four, you know,
Oh
to
yeah.
this day, and all of that stuff, and you know, Lee Ditko Spider Man, and you know those crazy Marvel monster stories, and are still going and you know getting Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams Batman stories, and
Well, and
all of
the companies are reprinting that stuff, and people are discovering it again, for the first time. So
oh yeah,
that stuff, like you say, it has legs. It really does.
yeah, and it's still amazing to see, and it really, you know, I mean, there were times that when the industry kind of really had collapsed in on itself in 95, 96, and all of a sudden I pretty much was one of the many artists who were pretty much you know out and done, you know and it was really hard, you know and it really, for a long time, it was hard to kind of deal with, because I didn't really see, that I was still an artist. I could still make stuff. I was just still kind of in that whole, mindset of like, well, I'm not working for the big two. It's like, yeah, but you're still an artist, you know, and that's what you did. You wanted to be an artist before you know, ever knew that, you could go, that people could go and draw Spider-Man, before you kind of really realized that was a job, specifically that someone drew Spider-Man, what have you. And, and that's when I think it was really about, you know, drawing and, creating and just doing that, as opposed to, creating Spider-Man. Well, no, it's like, just, you're a comic artist. You're not, that's what you do. You're a comic artist. You're not specifically a Spider-Man artist. You're a comic artist. So make comics, you know,
And
and kind of turning into that.
you had mentioned Steve Bryant earlier, which is a perfect segue into talking about how I became familiar with your work, because I picked up Ghoul Scouts.
Oh, yes.
So that's a key word here that I wanted to mention and bring up for people that don't know. If you want to give a quick elevator pitch on this and kind of how this book came to be.
All right. Well, as I like to say, Ghoul Scouts is a story about a group of misfit kids who have to save their town from paranormal activity, which isn't easy because they live in the paranormal capital of the world. So Steve and I had, you know, known each other through social media, and you know, he had done a um, pitch for something, and he had asked me to be an anchor on it. It was a book that he had put together. It was called The Black Cobra, and it was kind of like this multi-generational masked crime fighter kind of thing that started in like the Wild West, and then became something more modern. And I had started as an inker. He had another penciler, and it just ended up not going anywhere because like of different things with the artist, had to drop out and whatever. But you know, Steve had kind of known of my art too, my penciling from um, some stuff he had seen in the zombie book I had done. But he and I just talked, and he had said, "Hey, I've got this idea for this book that I've had for a while, and I think your art would be like perfect for it. I'm like, okay. And it's like, yeah. He goes, it's pretty much the pitch was, it was called Zomboy Scouts, because at the time, um, his his kid was in Scouts, and he had kind of written this book as as something to connect to that activity. And so I'm like, oh yeah, this sounds cool. And he gave me the thing, so I just started to design the characters, and he kind of gave this whole thing of like, yeah, these kids are, you know, they're a lot of like kind of more misfit kids, and you know, and it's all sorts of, they all come from a whole ton of different backgrounds and this. I'm like, okay, cool, this is awesome, you know, and so it's like, okay, let's put this together. And this was, we were putting this together before Stranger Things was even a thing,
Oh,
you know, and it just was kind of very, coincidental that our book came out the same time Stranger Things did,
yeah.
you know, and so yeah, so we did the first one, and we had a huge amount of fun with it, and we like to say it's like it's for kids who want to read The Walking Dead but really quite aren't old enough yet,
Perfect.
and it's full of action and peril, and I mean we try not to make it gory. I mean that's why all the zombies have like no, in the first volume have like no pupils. It's just these open, eye sockets. So we really didn't want them to feel like, like there was any sort of former humanity behind them.
Okay.
So we did that, and we went all out. We had, friends in the industry we knew and say, hey, let's do variant covers that I would ink, and so I got to ink, a bunch of cool guys. I mean, like, Jamal Eigel did a cover, and we had um, Brent Schoonover came in, and Sean Azaxe before he, started doing stuff at Marvel and DC, and Phil Hester, and we just had just an amazing fun time with it. And since then, we did another volume um, uh, called "I Was a Tweenage Werewolf." Um, we had put together a third volume um, titled UFOMG, which I created that title, so I was pretty proud of that one.
That's good.
And we were in the process of creating that one when COVID hit, and then our publisher, Action Lab, pretty much went radio silent for 6 months.
Great.
Um, and so it was like, okay, what's going on? I mean, nobody could get a hold of anybody in the offices. Payments to artists stop. And it was like, okay, what's going on? I mean, and then just all sorts of different, shenanigans started happening with Action Lab. And, you know, I finished up um, UFOMG, and I pretty much cranked it out. It was like it took me a while to just you know kind of get going on it, and then finally I was like, okay, this is done. But by that time, things had really kind of collapsed with Action Lab. Um, Several creators weren't getting paid, um, and various other things were going on. Some creators who were supposed to have like print copies of their books never had print copies made. Or hey, I was supposed to have a print copy, it's in digital, and then all of a sudden 3 days later an entire pallet of books would show up on that creator's doorstep with like, oh, you now owe $4,000 for these books that are here now. Here you
Wow.
go. you know and lots of different like contractual things just weren't being honored. And so a class action lawsuit came about with about 60 creators um, from Action Lab. and a lot of it was involving just, hey, this is contractual stuff that, Action Lab is supposed to be doing, like providing us with, quarterly updates of how our books sold, getting paid, making sure that, contracts that say, hey, I'm supposed to have, digital only or print and digital or, certain other things are being, addressed properly and, being taken care of what's in the contract. And so because of, the remnants of COVID and certain other things, it was about 2 years before we finally had our day in court, so to speak, or at least a preliminary one. Because it was like at the time, there was only a couple circuit court judges that were going to be able to hear this lawsuit. And they were so behind, they said, yeah, it could be a year and a half before you even, this even gets addressed. And so when we finally did, at that point, Action Lab was like, yeah, we want a dismissal because this was completely baseless. And all we really wanted as creators was to say, hey, we want to get our rights back. Give us our properties and we'll just walk away.
Right.
We just want to get out of these contracts because the contracts we had all signed for the most part, because when Steve and I had signed up at that time, guys like Jamal Eigel were like creative directors at Action Lab, so it was a great group of guys who were there. I mean, this was like when Action Lab was getting just tons of praise for books like Princeless and, and all sorts of other books. And it's like, wow, this is a really great one to work for. And it's like people we know are there and in editorial and creative. And it's like, this is great. And, and all of that just went away. Those guys left and it just went downhill really quick. And, and we were all just like, just let us take our books and go and do with them how we want to do it, And, so Action Lab was doing doing a whole, hey, we want this dismissed and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, like a year and a half later, it did get dismissed because while the judge saw that, yes, our contracts were similar, they weren't similar enough to be in part of a class action lawsuit. So it got dismissed, and in a lot of ways, I mean, Action Lab offered almost most of us our rights back to our books and our creations, but with certain limitations. Most of it being involving having to buy all of our back stock that was sitting in their warehouse in
Really?
in Alabama. Yeah. And it's like, oh, you want your rights back, fine, then you have to buy all of this book stock. And there were some creators who had signed these deals up with Action Lab, and Action Lab had just massively overprinted like their books. Like Steve and I had, we were lucky we didn't have a huge amount. We were actually one of the few creators who were like in the black, that had made money. And a lot of that was because we were buying our own copies of the trade collections of Ghoul Scouts for shows. Because if we could have bought them through Action Lab, but then for that distribution was going through Diamond, and we'd have to pay Diamond shipping and processing, and what we would make from those copies, by selling them at shows or whatever, was going to be like hardly anything. So I was buying them through my local comic shop, Westfield's, and they were, giving me a creator discount on it. So I was actually making something from the sales of those books, you know. So so that's how a lot of like Steve and I had, our stock was low on our trade paperbacks because he and I were buying them for shows. Steve would buy a whole ton of them and take them out to San Diego when he would go every year. We still had lots of copies of the original floppies, when those had been released. But I mean, there were creators who had like 6, 7, 8,000 copies of each issue they had. Yeah, that had been so overprinted. And actually I was like, well, you have to buy these at cost, and as well as come pick them up from the warehouse in Alabama and take them.
Wow.
And what indie creator is going to be able to go and do that?
Oh, right.
Oh yeah, I mean there were a couple of the creators who were just like, I just got this estimate and I was told, of how much, I'm going to do. It's going to cost me $46,000 to buy out my own creations. And that's just was just crazy.
So
So
how could they make a demand like that without it being pre-written into the contract?
because at the time when they were doing when these contracts were being done up, none of us thought that this was going to be happening. That the publisher of actually Brian Seaton was suddenly going to be kind of becoming this, you know, this person who was going to be, you know, demanding every single bit that we wanted. And unfortunately, parts of the contract too was that Action Lab would negotiate any contract involving um, any of the comics properties becoming media properties. So if someone were to come and say, "Hey, I want to make a movie of this property," Action Lab would be the ones negotiating that contract, not the creators.
Hmm.
Right after the first issue of Ghoul Scouts came out, Steve had it at San Diego, and right after he came back, he said, he was probably about like 2 weeks after San Diego was over. He gives me a call and says, "Hey, I thought you might be interested in this. I got contacted by a guy who picked up the first issue of Ghoul Scouts at San Diego, and he wants to talk to us about like doing something with it, like some kind of like straight to video animation or some other things. He wants to do something with this." I'm like, "You're kidding me." He goes, "No." I looked him up. This dude was one of the original producers of the first Mortal Kombat movie.
Oh, wow.
And apparently he does like these straight to video, like Lego movies of all sorts of properties, and has all, it's doing all sorts of stuff like that. And he said he wants to talk. And I'm like, holy crap. So we talked to the guy and, you know, and kind of learned what he wanted to do. It's like, okay, this would be really fun. This wasn't going to be like, oh, this is going to make us rich by any means, but this would definitely, be getting the property out there and, getting it a lot more people's eyes on it. And just, which for us would be like, oh, this is cool. And we said, well, you have to talk to, Action Lab because they handle all the negotiations of all this stuff. And they're like, okay, we'll talk to them. Months go by, we don't hear anything. It's like, well, these things like move slowly. Um, we had ended up we heard from the guy, um, and he was like, well, I haven't really heard anything from Action Lab. I kind of told them what I can do, and they said, yeah, we'll look at it, and I haven't heard anything else. We're like, okay, and never heard anything again. And it wasn't until later that Steve saw the guy at the San Diego, probably it had to be a year or two later. And, we were like, well, what happened with this, And he's like, what, didn't they, weren't you guys told? And we're like, no, we didn't hear anything. It just went, completely silent. And apparently, Action Lab was trying to demand all of this huge amount of money,
Oh, wow.
for the property. And the guy said, no, we don't pay that much for property. We don't pay that much for, these ones here when we do this. It's like, we're not going to pay you that money. And he had asked him, it's like, well, how much are you going to pay the creators? And it was going to be just this pittance to me and Steve,
Yeah.
And at that point, the guy was like, I just walked away. I said, no deal. This is not going to happen. But Action Lab never told us that. They didn't tell us anything. So they had just essentially just had screwed the deal up so badly by trying to just be overly greedy about it, you know.
Wow.
But that's the kind of stuff that was in that contract. But I mean, looking at it now, I mean, the bright side is after everything last year when they kind of had announced, that that the class action lawsuit was, going to be dismissed. The guy who's been our lawyer through all of this and everything was like, well, there's a couple things you can do, because the fact that, once this lawsuit had gotten announced, Action Lab pretty much ceased publications for the most part,
Oh, yeah.
because all of everything they had was all of our stuff, and no new creators were coming to them to publish because they knew about the lawsuit. So for all intents and purposes, Action Lab wasn't a publisher. They had nothing, except, the older stuff that, that had already been published. So we had all decided to start going and having our digital editions of stuff removed from places like Comixology. And because it's like, well, if Action Lab is not publishing it, the only thing that really is left out there is digital. So we all started to contact Amazon and Comixology and saying, hey, this publisher is in violation of the contract. We do not want to have our stuff on this platform anymore. And almost all of us, I think with the exception of two creators, because they're in Europe, and I think they had to kind of go about a different way, we had all of our properties removed from Comixology.
Oh.
So there was no more digital editions available of any of our books. And
so
under
Action
the
Lab wasn't going to make any money off you guys. Well,
right. And with that, the nice thing is in our contracts is that if our books go 1 year without being published in any form, whether it's digital or print, the rights go back to us.
Okay.
So we are really hoping, I believe it should be probably sometime, I think early summer, that our rights will be coming back to us for all of us creator for these books. So Steve and I had actually finished and had UFOMG done for like over a year. And it was colored, it was lettered, it was all set to go. And we were just like, we would really like to get this out. And, Steve and I had kind of published a quote ash can edition that we had very limited copies of out at shows that we were doing as print on demand, just because every show I was at for the better part of 3-4 years, people were asking, hey, when's volume 3 going to come out? When's volume 3 going to come out? And I'd be like, well, we're working on it. And then once the lawsuit hit, it's like, well, here it is, So it's done. And once we get our rights back, we're going to be re-releasing the first volume, kind of repackaged, so it looks a little more like the second volume does, because the first volume is essentially Action Lab. Hi, we're going to take each, the copy of all 4 issues and just slap them in together, complete with all the ads into a square bound format. So we want to try and clean that up, but then we're going to try and get get UFOMG out, and I'm actually working on Volume 4 right now, which is called Holiday Spirits. So it's going to involve the Christmas themed kind of you know spookiness and things like that. So that is what we've got in the pipe right now. But it's been a long road trying to get where we are with these kids, and it's a lot of fun, drawing them and doing these stories, and so we'll see where it goes. I mean, both of us are really busy. I mean, Steve's got between Athena Voltaire and some of the other gazillion other projects that guy has in his head, and I mean, and he teaches full time, as well. He teaches art and comics history, so he's a busy dude.
Cool. I have one mini slideshow set up here because both our guest and Matt Hansel have collaborated together on some drawings. So Matt
Very nice.
Hansel, do you kind of want to tell your side of the story on how you formed this friendship and partnership working with Mark? And as you do that, I'm going to show off a couple collaborations that I found online.
Okay. Well, I had been doing some Neil Adams studies because I was going to maybe do a project with continuity. And also, I was going to do a superhero Marty and Spud story, and I kind of wanted to do the superhero part of it in that vein. And Mark and I had known each other online for a while, and we see each other every year at the Comic Palooza in Elgin at the Gail Borden Library. So we've known each other prior to that. And Mark saw some of the stuff and that I had been doing some of the pencils and reached out to ask if maybe I would be interested in him inking some of it. And what was funny was I had been thinking about asking him to ink some of it. So serendipity kind of worked out. He just beat me to the punch there. But they've been a lot of fun to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was like, well, I'm gonna throw some color on these,
And that really sold it.
So your collaborations have mostly been on just like original art that you just kind of put on the table. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. I'm showing some of those examples here, and then I have a very fun one that I came across.
Oh yes,
yes,
that was fun.
we did that that was for the charity auction, wasn't it?
Yeah. For at FallCon up in Minneapolis.
Right, yeah. Which is a great show, by the way, shameless plug. If you get the chance to do FallCon, go do it.
Yeah, I've been doing that show for since when I first broke in as a pro. One of the first kind of big convention I did as a pro was back when the Chicago Comic Con was Chicago Comic Con, and still held down in Chicago when it was the Radisson there by the
at the old hotel there, yeah.
Yeah, so by the airport, and which is now at the hotel, it's now the Holiday Inn, and I sat next to Peter Krause and Gordon Purcell, and and we were chit chatting, and they're like, hey, we there's this convention that's just started up over the last couple of years, and it's up in the Twin Cities, and they're looking for other artists, and we'll definitely give them your name if you want to go. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool, and so it was like soon after that I got this letter in the mail, and back in the days before the whole email thing, and it was like, hey, we'd love you to come up, and here's directions. We'll put you up in a hotel, and and this was right after I was doing Lensman before the whole Marvel days, and and so I'm there at this hotel called the Thunderbird, which is like all like Native American motif, complete with like, okay, here's this taxidermied bear that's here in the in the lobby, and and the guests that they had were the other guests. So it was me, but they had Tim Truman and Bo Smith, and Tim, of course, at the time was was working on, I think it was Scout. He had just started doing Scout after leaving, Grimjack at first, and Tim loved the hotel being his whole, into the into Native Americanism and the Southwest, and just he loved the hotel, as kitschy as it was and culturally inappropriate. He loved it, because it was like his whole element. But yeah, I mean, I started going to that show, and I have been going, with the exception of I think 2 or 3 years, ever since, and that was in 1991.
Oh,
So yeah, the show is my favorite show to do every year, and they treat and have always treated every creator, no matter you know what skill level and professional you know level they're at. The guy who makes his own comic in the basement, by stapling all the pages together, to guys like Dan Jurgens, drawing Superman there. You know, uh, Everybody is welcome. Tables for the artists were free up until just this last couple of years, because this being a nonprofit show,
hmm
you know, their each show funded the next one. Well, when COVID hit, they had pretty much 3 shows they didn't use, and it really almost finished them off. But that show has always been so good to me, and I always would tell creators about it, and they just really make sure that every creator is treated, the same. And the fans have always been fantastic. And, you know, I've been able to make so many great friendships and, you know, artistic, you know, partnerships with so many people up there. And it's just, it's a great comic city vibe. It's fantastic. So, but yeah, that show's like my favorite one to go to every year. It's like I will make the 4 hour drive, you know, without hesitation.
Ooh, cool. There is one image in the initial slideshow that I am kept up in the background in case D. Brad didn't mention or see it when we're going through. So we're going to spotlight this commission you did for Uncle Scrooge.
Oh yes, that
Oh,
was a
nice.
fun one.
Great.
It's always fun to kind of,
Watercolor, right? Watercolor.
yeah. It's always, every now and then I like to kind of, step outside my wheelhouse and try and do something different. And that one was, you know, no exception. Somebody had said, "Hey, can you do an Uncle Scrooge?" I'm like, I would love to do it. And I just kind of thought of something where I was like, okay, what would be like one of the most completely Uncle Scrooge things? It's like money growing on trees,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and being able to do it with like kind of this whole fall feeling, and him walking, and through like a park and do it. And I just thought it was perfect, you know.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that was the a request or if your idea and the leaves and the money comparison. So yeah.
Yeah, and it was, if I remember right, I think it was just like, they just said, "Hey, just have, you know, do whatever you want with Uncle Scrooge." And I just thought, okay, this would be a perfect one. The whole money, in his world, money does grow on trees.
Yeah. Excellent. So we're going to get to the end of the show here. We kind of wrap up. We learned a lot about Mark. I love those stories. A lot of great information there on drawing tools and art. And yeah, I really appreciate all that the detail on there. It was awesome. It was excellent. What we're going to do is just kind of show off where we got with our work. At the end of the show in the credits, once it's all edited together, we'll see the stages of whether it's the final or work in progress. We'll see that stuff in the slideshow, but right now we'll see where we're at. I'll kick it off since I have them in my hand here, but I went ahead with my 3 Dr. Horrible sketch cards. I just kind of laid down the base colors. After the show is when I go in with some colored pencils and shading and any extra details with backgrounds and such. But I got my Captain Hammer, got the Dr. Horrible, and a penny as well. So because Mark mentioned drawing tools, that's what led me to use hammer as Captain Hammer, and that's what inspired my drawings here this evening. Jumping over to Matt Hansel, We've seen a handful of Buxleys. We've seen you starting
That's right.
lettering on Marty and Spud. Let's take a look at what
Yep.
you've been working on.
So here we have the Miss Buxley's. I just got to fill in the blacks.
Excellent. And in prior episodes, we've seen you do similar studies with Sarge, and
Yep.
you've done Beetle Baileys and stuff like that. So it's cool
Yep.
to see that.
And then I also finished Simon.
All right.
And I think you've talked about that paper before, where you just found a bunch of that you used to.
Yes.
How did that work again?
I had that printed off special for me at a local printer years and years ago when I first started doing conventions. And I thought I had used it all up, but I found a whole stash of it and then also some Underdog sketch paper that I was able to find. So it's super slick. So you have to use brush pens on it because anything else will bleed or won't dry. But it's a lot of fun to draw on if you can get the brush pen to do what you want with it.
And jumping over to Troy, if we could take a look at where you got with that comic page.
I abandoned it.
Uh-oh.
But I was doodling the
Ooh.
ideas
nice.
that I had.
Oh, that's nice.
It's sort of a guitar playing friar, and he's preaching about peace, love, and tacos.
There you go.
Three things we could all use right now.
Yeah.
Brother Jerry. It's Brother Jerry.
Brother Jerry. He doesn't. That's as good a name as any. I don't have a name. I've been doodling him like in the bottom of my math sheets at work lately. So
there's a story with him coming.
Maybe it's my future self when all this work stuff just doesn't work out. I'll just
Yeah.
We're gonna check in on D. Brad on your progress and what you've been working on.
Well, this is the I don't know what his name is. I forget. What's it called? Hollow Knight.
Hollow Knight.
Yeah, video game character. And then I'll probably make it like lighter gray and then darker around him. And then here's Catherine O'Hara as
Very
Moira.
nice.
Moira from Schitt's Creek, yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And jumping over to our guest, Mark Stegbauer. If we take a look at the progress on the Hulk, we've been chiming in.
It is all done. That was the only thing I got done, but we got this nice
Hulk fantastic.
It's great.
Lots of little different, pieces and techniques and noodling and all sorts of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
Channeled a little Perez over here, little Ordway over here, little Al Williamson over here.
Love it. Excellent. So yeah, that is going to do it then. Once again, check out the credits in the show for the final pictures of everything and based on what we complete after the show. But a giant thank you to Mark Stegbauer for joining us here on Cartoonist by Night.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.
Yes, excellent. And one thing, if you want to let people know at home, the best way to reach you, follow you online, your Patreon, your website, anything you want to promote to let people know where to find you.
Okay, well, I'm over at Instagram, just under at Mark Stegbauer, my first and last name. People can check out my weekly sci-fi space opera all ages webcomic called Warp Dragon, which is over just at patreon.com/Mark Stegbauer. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook under Mark Stegbauer Artist of Stuff is my fan page. I'm not on there that much, but Instagram and some of the other ones are a little more accessible for you to see what I'm working on.
Excellent. And all that information will be on the screen as well in the show notes for the links to follow Mark. And once again, thank you very much for joining us here on Cartoonist by Night. It was awesome. I'm always interested to hear about the drawing tools, as my fellow castmates here are always talking about what they're using and experimenting. And I'm just sitting here trying to eat it all up, trying to figure out what all this stuff means. And the stories that you brought to is just tremendous and a great contribution to this drawing.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It was really awesome to come and hang out with you guys and watch you draw and do all the fun stuff here.
Excellent. So that is going to do it for another episode of Cartoonist by Night, because the sun is starting to come up, so it's time to get back to our day jobs. See you later, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, got it. Can't get the thing closed.
Have you played Atari today?
Okay,
I was crossing my eyes.